Well, I'm pleased to say we're joined now by John Bolton, who is the former US National Security Advisor and former US Ambassador to the United Nations. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mr. Bolton. Always a pleasure having you on the programme. Now, on Monday, President Trump held talks with his top advisors to discuss the pressure campaign on Venezuela. I'd like to start by asking you, what do you think is President Trump's intended outcome with regards to Venezuela?
Well, that's obviously the critical question, and I have to say I can't give you a good answer. I don't know what his desired outcome is. He has said it's not regime change, but on the other hand, he's apparently threatened Maduro with severe consequences if he doesn't leave the country. He's had the U.S. military attacking drug boats. So is it something to do with illegal narcotics trafficking, terrorism? I think the problem is in Trump's mind, it's all muddled together. And he really has not made a final decision. I think he's gotten himself into a potentially difficult position on a number of fronts because, as is unfortunately so often the case, he hasn't thought through in a systematic way what he's trying to accomplish and what he needs to do to get there. So it would be embarrassing in some circumstances not to be able to give you a direct answer, but I don't think Trump himself knows.
He has deployed the world's largest aircraft carrier and several other military assets to the Caribbean. Do you think we're looking at a situation in which US military intervention in Venezuela looks increasingly likely?
You know, I'd have to say from all the steps that have been taken that the answer to that question is yes. I think Trump would look incredibly foolish and really harm his own personal image, not to mention the United States, if he's brought the Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group all the way from Europe to the Caribbean and then sends them back effectively without using them. But this is an example of the confusion in Trump's thinking. It's the cart before the horse. He brings in this incredible military capability without deciding what he's going to do with it or what he hopes to achieve. And now he's got a problem that if he doesn't use it, he looks even more erratic than in fact he is.
Now, we've agreed that we're not sure whether regime change and overthrowing President Maduro is indeed President Trump's desired outcome here. But in your opinion, is that the right outcome? Would President Trump be right to want Nicolás Maduro to be overthrown?
Yes, I support overthrowing the Maduro regime. We supported that objective in the first Trump term. We used essentially economic pressure, but unfortunately not nearly enough to accomplish that objective. I think the U.S. has a significant national security interest at stake in Venezuela, the presence of a major Russian contingent, their surrogates, the Cubans, the Chinese, the Iranians, using Caracas as a base for financial activity and support for Hezbollah. All of these are threats to U.S. national security and to our colleagues in the rest of the Western Hemisphere, not to mention the people of Venezuela that have suffered under the Chavez-Maduro regime for 25 years now. So I think we've got good reasons to want to seek a regime change. I think we would be justified in using military force. But given that we tried to work with the Venezuelan opposition in 2018 and 19 to oust Maduro and failed, I think it's incumbent on the administration to get it right this time. And that's what I'm worried they don't have.
So what's your sort of forecast with regards to what happens next? Do you envisage a negotiated exit for Maduro? And we have had some insights into that following on from the telephone conversation between President Trump and Nicolás Maduro. Or do you think military intervention is the more likely route? What would be your prediction?
Well, I'd be surprised at this point if there's not some military activity, but whether that's enough to convince Maduro to go, whether it splits the top ranks of the Venezuelan military, I have to say I'm skeptical. Back in 2019, when the opposition launched what it hoped and believed could well be a successful regime change effort, they found that the Russians and the Cubans had basically said to Maduro, "You're not leaving." And I think given the stakes that those two countries, not to mention China and Iran, have in keeping that regime in place, they may not respond overtly to the use of military force by Washington, but I think they'll try and have Maduro's back and convince him not to leave.
Let's start talking now about the situation with regards to efforts to broker an end to the war in Ukraine. I'd like to start this chapter by asking you why you think Steve Witkoff is leaving Moscow, by all accounts, empty-handed.
Well, I don't think it's surprising he's leaving empty-handed. His initial plan, at least according to press reports a few weeks ago, was essentially a perfect from Russia's point of view. And indeed, many people thought Russia had given him the plan and he had taken it as his. It's been scrubbed by Ukrainians and European friends of Ukraine in Geneva. A week or so ago, it was discussed again with the Ukrainians by Secretary Rubio, and many changes were made. Now, if what we're entering into now is a period of negotiation, this all plays to Russia's advantage, because I think Putin and the Kremlin believe that they can persuade Trump that they're making the better case. But as of now, I don't see any progress. My prediction for the rest of the year, let's put it that way, would be simply that the fighting continues. There may be additional discussions on a potential deal, but I think for now it appears stalled.
In an article in the British newspaper The Telegraph, you described Steve Witkoff's brokering as being, quote, simply pro-Russian. And I'd like to ask you what you believe his motivations are. Why would he be pro-Russian?
I don't think he has the slightest understanding of 35 plus years of tension between an independent Ukraine and Russia. I think his knowledge of history and the region is minimal. I think he acts like a real estate dealer, and there's nothing wrong with being a real estate dealer, but the Ukrainians are fighting not for a specific piece of territory that can be divided up. They're fighting for their freedom and independence. It's existential for them. And the Russians, although I don't agree with the Kremlin's position, under Vladimir Putin, they're fighting to recreate the Russian Empire. That's pretty important for them. And the idea that some utterly inexperienced, uninformed negotiator, simply because he's loyal to Donald Trump, is going to find an answer here, I think is naive and potentially dangerous. It's certainly dangerous for Ukraine, which has faced now nearly 4 years of unprovoked aggression from Moscow.
We've heard from the Russians yesterday. In fact, President Putin said the Europeans aren't serious about peace and that Russia is ready for war. What do you make of that?
Well, I think this is obviously part of the Russian propaganda effort to show their resolve has not weakened at all, that they still believe victory will be theirs. And indeed, there are plenty of indications that the Russians think that after almost 4 years, this war of attrition against Ukraine may be close, perhaps in the spring, perhaps by the summer of next year, that Ukraine's military will simply crack. I don't think that's right, but they may be gambling. If they can simply keep this going for another 8 or 9 months, they may get not only the territory they've been asking for, they could get much more as well.
There are quite a lot of analysts who are suggesting there are some splits in the ranks of the Trump administration when it comes to foreign policy, particularly this issue. Are you detecting that? Some are talking about strong differences of opinion, differences of approach between, for example, Vance and Rubio. What are you detecting?
Well, I think there are splits. I think they are beginning to emerge on Ukraine, but perhaps on Venezuela as well. A big part of Trump's base is really fundamentally isolationist, and they don't see why protecting Ukraine is in America's national interest, although I believe very strongly that it is. And they certainly, this MAGA base, do not want to see Trump start a new war in Venezuela. They thought that he was going to end endless wars, not begin new ones. I think Vance really reflects that MAGA base, and I think he is in conflict with Rubio. They've done an excellent job of avoiding leaks from the administration in the second term, I have to say. But it also mirrors splits within the Republican Party. I think Republican support for Ukraine in Congress is really very strong, Trump notwithstanding. And I think support is strong in Congress among Republicans for overthrowing Maduro as well. I think they can see the incompetence in the administration, and that's what really worries them. But this is also part of a broader trend that's happening in Washington over the past 30 days. I think people now see, because of the election results last month and special election yesterday in Tennessee, that Trump's popularity is declining and his base is beginning to fragment. So I think he's past the point of being a new president and has begun the slide into being a lame duck president.
Right, and I'm assuming that's what you meant in your Economist piece where you described America as being past peak Trump. Just to wrap up, Ambassador Bolton, on the subject of foreign policy, who do you think President Trump trusts the most when it comes to foreign policy?
I think he trusts his own instincts. I think he listens to people basically to find somebody who agrees with the direction he's already going in. That doesn't mean he always follows his own impulses, but he thinks he knows this game pretty well. I think that's largely incorrect, but he never has lacked for self-confidence. Nobody would ever say that.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. John Bolton, former U.S. National Security Advisor. Thank you very much for your time.